TJ Talks, a session about professional practice.
Professional practice all the way with TJ Talks. Welcome everybody. My name is Jo Cook. I am the Deputy Editor of Training Journal and I am your host today. And I get to speak to Paul Matthews and I'm very, very pleased about this. We have a number of webinars that we run every month and this is our practice webinar. And I think this is a great quote to start us off from Zig Ziglar, who says, "You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great." And this is a great way indeed to start and push forward in what it is that we're doing together. So please use that chat window to speak to each other and also to us. And you can drop in any links, any ideas. If you've got a blog or you know somebody else who's written an article on something, please do share it with us. At the bottom of your screen, you have a question and answer pod. If you want to make sure that I've seen your question, please pop it in there and we will address it. We've also got Twitter going on in the background. So if you want to go to #TJ Talks, John, who's our editor, will be tweeting there on behalf of Training Journal. And if you've got any little ideas, little nuggets you want to take away or share, please go and do that as well. This is a public recording and it'll be available on YouTube. And I think at this point, it's more than time that we got on Paul Matthews. Now, our conversation today is all around, do you give managers what they want or what they need? But before we get to that, let's just hear a little bit from Paul and find out exactly what it is he does. So Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, please. And I will just unmute you. And here we go.
That's a long story. I'm a farm boy from New Zealand originally, if that's what you want to know. But I've been in L&D now for 20 years or more, so built up a little bit of stuff along the way and written a few books, and it's great to talk about it. Love to chat about L&D.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I was going to paste a link to where your books are so people can go and have a look at them if they want to. I've got a couple here. I've got bookmarks. Well, there we go. I'll hide that bookmark away, but you can see they're well loved. Paul, tell us a little bit about this concept, this question that we've got here about, do you give managers what they want or what they need? Because we all know there are managers that come along internal to our organisation, or maybe clients if we're an external vendor, and they say, we need this. And I always use the example of time management training because it's a nice broad one. And sometimes we know that that's not really the solution to the problem that's being presented. But do we give them the time management training they want? Or quite frankly, my opinion is usually let's have a conversation and probably give you not what you want, but actually what you need. Where are you on that one, Paul?
Well, actually, I think you always have to give them what they want, which sounds a bit controversial for the very simple reason that if you don't give them what they want, chances are they're going to resist what it is you're giving them and perhaps even sabotage it. Now, the issue, of course, is making sure that what they want is actually what they need. So you need to get that alignment between their wants and their needs. So very often when they come initially, they're going to want something because they've thought about it and they think they've come up with a solution. It may or may not be the right solution. And often it's not, to be quite honest, when they come and ask for training. So what you've got to do then is help make visible to them their real needs. And then they'll start wanting that instead. And then you're on a winner because you've got alignment between what they want and what they need. If you just deliver what they need and ignore what they want, and if those are different, then there's a problem because, as I said, there's a good chance they'll resist what you're offering. They won't get involved. They won't support it. They may even sabotage it. If you just deliver what they want and it's not what they need, then there's a pretty good chance it's going to fail anyway. So the core thing here is to get the wants and needs aligned. So that's the first job you've got to do.
So that's a really interesting point. And Andrew in the chat has said, I'd question whether managers and people in general know what they want. What are your thoughts on that?
They know what they want. It's just that what they want may not be what they need. And that's because they haven't thought it through in a way that has diagnosed the underlying causes and barriers and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we know what we want. Everybody does, whatever that is, but it isn't always the best thing for us. And that applies to life in general. So it is about getting and sitting with them, as you said earlier, and saying, well, hang on, let's dig into this a little bit to find out what's really going on. And once we figure out what's really going on, then it will become more obvious what we should be doing. And they'll say, that's what I want. Forget that thing I used to want, because that's now behind me. I've forgotten about that. Now what I want is what you've shown me I need or should be doing. So that's that whole performance consultancy process, if you like, is sitting with them and consulting with them, guiding them, taking them through a process which will help them, I guess, expose to them their real needs. And then they're going to start lining up with what has to happen. And then you're on a winner.
And I think maybe this is what Andrew was referring to. So Andrew has said in response to what you verbalized that they know, the managers or people know what they want as an outcome, and L&D should help them understand the ways to get it. So maybe what the manager is presenting to us as, I want time management training, or insert one of any other million examples here. What they're doing is they think they know the solution to the problem. So they know the outcome, which is I want people to be better at whatever it might be, getting in on time or whatever. But actually, it's up to us to help them see the real need. So Andrew, if I've got that completely wrong, please let me know in chat. I don't want to put words into your mouth. So I think it's an interesting point you're making there. And Linda Cooper says, what sort of methods do you use to help people identify?
Yeah, well, I can give you a simple tool for that. I can talk it through today, and if you link up with me on LinkedIn, I can send you a model or a diagram as well. But coming back to what Andrew said earlier, it's absolutely right. The outcome is often known, or the desire for the outcome. But even in that circumstance, at that point when you say, what do you really want? Can you define that in terms of an outcome? They will often have a fairly woolly idea of what that is. You've still got to dig into that desired outcome and bring it back to say, well, what changes do we want in terms of the knowledge, skills, and behaviors they are, or the behaviors they're exhibiting, and the knowledge and skills they perhaps might need to support those behaviors. So there's still a lot of definition required very often, as they just have a general sense, as you said, I want people to arrive on time, or whatever that is. But what does that really mean in practice? And until you've got that figured out, and figured out where the gaps are, do you really know, well, what intervention might be appropriate? So that brings us back onto that question of, well, how do you make visible their needs to them? In other words, how do you perform that consultancy process? What is the process to go through to sit down with them? I'm very happy to go through that and share it with you guys over the next few minutes, if you like.
I think that would be really cool, actually, Paul, because Davina has asked, Paul, how do you deal with senior managers, though? Sometimes it's very hard to have these absolutely. Conversations. Yeah. So maybe, well, maybe some of your...
And that depends, that comes back to that question of the brand or credibility of L&D. In other words, if that senior manager just says, I want some training, get on and do it, and they're senior enough, sometimes you're just going to have to buckle under and do what they want to do if you want to keep your job, quite frankly. I think that's sad, because clearly they have a poor opinion of L&D in order to railroad them in that way into a specific solution. Chances are they wouldn't say that to their logistics manager if there was a logistics problem in warehousing, or to their marketing manager, and so on and so forth. So why are they taking that stance with L&D and insisting on a specific solution? So that comes back to the credibility of L&D, and that's a whole different conversation, I guess, to what we're doing today. But what you will find is, what you don't want to do is say to that manager, senior or otherwise, you're being a very silly person because you're asking for this stuff, and really you're being a bit stupid. That's not going to endear you to anybody. So what you've got to do is kind of say, okay, and focus on the outcomes, as somebody mentioned earlier, on what are you trying to achieve here? Where are you trying to get to? Let's focus on that, and not kind of mention the training word or the e-learning word or anything else, and just say, let's focus on the outcomes and have a discussion around that. And then from there, we'll figure out the best way to get those outcomes for you. So that's how you can have that discussion with that senior manager without calling them a silly bunny, basically. Because in a sense, that's almost what you're doing, is saying, well, you're being a bit stupid because you're asking for something that really isn't going to solve your problem. But you can't tell them that overtly, unfortunately.
No, or if you don't have a very good relationship
In the right
with them, if you
relationship,
wanted
absolutely
to.
you can. Yeah. So really what you want is a facilitated process to take that person through, even if they're really senior and have all the cards, in their hand. If you lead them through a process that helps them kind of come to terms and exposes some stuff they haven't thought through, they'll say, okay, yeah. And I've had this many times, and I've talked to people. They say, actually, that training I was asking for probably wouldn't work. Okay, well, what are we going to do instead? Or how do we modify it? And I've absolutely had that when you take people through a process that is not challenging their, sense of self or what they've come up with. In other words, it's a face-saving exercise, and that's how you need to operate with the senior people.
Yeah, I find it's very much about starting where they are. So when they say we want training on X, you go, okay, make a note, you want this, you want that, and just ask those questions almost like you're going down that road. And then you can open up that conversation, because if they feel heard, if they feel like you're taking them seriously, then that conversation kind of can widen and broaden.
Get focused on the outcomes rather than on the training. You sort of almost don't mention the training. You just say, we're looking at the outcomes. So you can sort of say, yeah, we do that kind of thing in L&D. Let's focus on the outcomes to get you what you want, and then have that performance consultancy conversation. And then try and avoid the training word at all in those conversations, because at that point it's still too early to be talking about an intervention anyway.
So tell us a little bit more about that performance consultancy conversation.
Yeah, well, there's a few stages to it. I mean, normally they will start with an almost ad hoc request. It might even be stopping in the corridor, or an email that just says, hey, I need a one-day time management training, to use your example from earlier, for this group of people, and I need it to happen within a month or something like that. So the response to that, you've got to get some kind of sit-down conversation with them at that point. Somehow you've got to engineer that. So your first job is to sell them on the need to sit down. So you've got to go back to them and have a brief conversation and basically say, if we don't touch this problem that you've got, or that you think you've got, for the next 6 months, what's it going to cost the organization? And they probably won't have an answer to that. But you can say, well, is it £10,000? Is it 100? Is it £1 million? What are we talking about here? Let's get some sense of urgency and scale into this conversation. And you'll be able to narrow it down to say, well, it's £100,000 plus or minus, 50% or whatever. And they'll say, yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. So now you've got a sense of scale and also a sense of urgency. And at that point, you can either say, well, that's such a small amount of money, I can talk that through with you, but we've got far more urgent things in L&D to deal with. So that helps you also prioritize. But if it's a significant amount of money, then clearly you've got to say, okay, we need to sort down and solve this and figure out what our real outcome is, because that's not a trivial amount of money. And if we don't sit down and get it right, we're actually both of us going to have a real problem when what we do doesn't work very well. So it's worth sitting down for an hour, isn't it, to sort this out? Okay. And what we have to sort out when we sit down for an hour is what's currently happening and what's the gap between what we want to happen instead. And specifically, what's the gap in terms of behaviors? And then in order to generate that behavior shift, what skills and knowledge might we need to put in place to underpin that shift in behaviors? And then how do we embed that? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about when we sit down in an hour, for that hour. And that might be this week, next week, or whatever. So you actually put a time in the diary. And then you have that conversation over that hour. It's that whole conversation, and even there's words to say, is in that red book that you held up earlier, my second book on capability. So that process is in there. But it'd be very rare for a senior person or anybody in management not to sit down with you and have that conversation. It really would be. And if okay, I'll use the word stupid enough not to want to sit down, then you probably need to go to your boss and their boss and make things, bang some heads together, because starting any kind of learning intervention without having that sort of scoping initial meeting is crazy. So what you do is go through that process, and then you go back and again ask those same questions. If we don't touch this for 6 months, what's it worth? And their thinking will have changed around that, because they've probably thought about it since you had that initial kind of sell them on the idea of the meeting conversation. And also they will have thought a bit more about, well, what behaviors do they want? Because chances are they will have said, oh, they're not doing what I want them to do. Yeah, but what do you want them to do instead? And they probably haven't even thought about that. So they haven't thought about what good looks like. They've just thought about what bad looks like. And they're moving away from what bad looks like rather than moving towards what good looks like. So you need to shift that perspective as well. So it's that whole conversation. And there's a chart that I use in a process. I'll hold it up here. You can't read it, but I'm very happy to send that chart off to anybody. If they link up with me on LinkedIn or something, they'll find me, and I'll pass that on. And it's about taking them through that chart. And the tool I recommend for that is the cause-effect diagram, the Ishikawa or fishbone diagram. And that's a very useful tool to look at this model and start drilling out, well, where are the real barriers, where are the real causes that are causing people not to do the behaviors we want and causing them to do the behaviors we don't want.
How often do you find when you go through that kind of diagram and that conversation that by the end of it, actually it's not training at all that needs to be the solution?
About 80% of the time, there or thereabouts. And I've seen research that supports that. Now, it's usually more complex than just, is it training or not? Chances are there's going to be a half a dozen or more different things you might have to do to mesh together into a program to get the changes you want. There might be some IT changes, there might be some process changes, and so on and so forth. But almost certainly there will be less training than what someone thinks there will be or need to be. And there may not need to be any at all. It could be done with job support or job aids. So once you've had that first conversation, then you've got to start at the end of that hour-long session or thereabouts, you then would start brainstorming, because they'll get to the point where saying, actually, there's more going on here than what I thought there was. That's all you're really trying to do at that point. And at that point, they're already shifting from what they wanted as a solution to the fact that there may be multiple solutions, and they need to be stitched together in a way that actually gives them a program to work through over a period of time. So that's really where you need to get them. And then you can do a little bit of a brainstorm with them at the end of that session. Well, given these things we've now identified under, that were previously hidden, what can we do about those? And at that point, you would never agree to a solution, because you need to talk to other stakeholders, because they're one stakeholder, but clearly you've got others who are the delegates or the employees themselves. And then there might be internal or external customers. There might be more senior people, other departments, all sorts of other stakeholders may be involved. So you need to get that bigger picture of how that fits and meshes with everything else. But what you will do by brainstorming a few kind of nominal or ideas in that meeting, they'll go away and start implementing some of them anyway, because they'll be cheap and almost immediately possible to do. And that will start changing what's going on. So effectively they're prodding the system, which will then change in response to those prods. And then that will give you more information about how it can be changed and fixed on a more permanent basis. And they may even just fix it without, almost costing no training, and then they can say thanks very much, and it's done. I mean, I've seen that happen too.
And that time and reflection is really good. So if you've had that conversation, they've put a few things in place, they have time to reflect. And something that I really like about my role when I do these kind of things is when the managers come to you, they said, I want X training course. You have that conversation and they go, oh, good question. I haven't thought about it that way. And then having that time and that reflection means they go and do those things and they reflect on it more and come back to you. And then in that follow-up conversation, it can be quite different. And actually, this is where we go back to in the chat. We've been talking about partnering and about building credibility. And presumably, Paul, that's where some of that comes from, is not just in the outcome or the training that you deliver.
Yeah. Your
but
brand as an L&D practitioner or professional will be greatly enhanced if the person that you're talking to suddenly realizes that you have the ability to uncover things they couldn't see, or help them uncover things they couldn't see. Because it's a collaborative consultancy arrangement. They know their business and their business area. You have some processes to apply. Together you can drill into the existing problem and come up with, use a diagnostics process and come up with some ways to solve the problem that neither of you would have been able to do on your own. And I think some L&D people, it's sheer hubris to think they can go in and think that they have the answer and that the other person is being stupid. It's got to be a collaborative approach. And this is where you get into things like design-centered thinking when you then start moving into solutions. But again, that's beyond what we're talking about today. So this is just the first step in the process of where do you then go from here. But what you are doing is setting up, in effect, that credibility thing. You're setting your stall out as the person that can manage this process and can put in very valuable things. So it comes back to credibility and reputation of L&D as well. Plus, of course, you'll end up with situations where the training that was requested just never happens, or a very small piece of it does, in which case you're saving an awful lot of L&D money and resources. And I've actually seen people apply this and literally slash their L&D budget overnight virtually, because a lot of the training they were doing just wasn't doing any good. And now they've got a process in place that's auditable in a sense, and then they can say, we're not doing that anymore because here's the proof that it wasn't and didn't ever work, and here's what we're going to do instead. So yeah.
And it's about putting that money, that resource in the right place, isn't it? Where actually will make some difference. And to that point, Michael's asked a great question in chat. Michael says, how do you deal with managers not following through on embedding the knowledge and the skills and the behaviours and just going back to the old ways? Yep. And I have a feeling, Michael, that Paul's answer might be, why my learning transfer?
That whole thing on learning transfer, and that it's very dependent on the culture that's there in the organisation, the expectations of that culture in terms of how people behave or react following a training course. And there's in my book, I've quoted some research that drives out 12 levers of learning transfer. And if you go and pull all those 12 levers, you will get that embedding and then sustainability of behavior change. So I would recommend, if you're interested in that, to go and have a look at that book. And in the back of that book, there's a couple of other books I recommend as being worth reading in that space. So that'll give you pretty much everything you want to really get that going well. But I'm happy to have a chat about that at a different place, in a different place and time. So another webinar we can do learning transfer as opposed to this one, because that's kind of the other end. That what we're talking about here, do you give them what they want or need, is that initial consultancy process. That's at the front end, and then you've got delivery of something, and then you've got the embedding and measurement stuff that follow that. So it's all part of the same big longer term process. But all of the bits need to be there, and it's like a chain. The weakest link is the weakest link of the chain. So they've all got to be strong links in order for this to generate the right kind of behavior change and then business results that what you're looking for.
Yeah, and a similar, well, not a similar question, but I think probably a similar answer will come from Neve. Neve says, sometimes after you've unpicked a problem and uncovered a number of solutions, how do you prevent L&D becoming the owner of a bigger problem? Because the line manager will still see you as the fixer of their issue.
You do have to be careful of that. What you don't want to do is allow L&D to become the owner of any of those problems, because they're execution of strategy problems. They're out there and they belong out there in the business, and L&D is there to support people to be capable and competent of executing that strategy. The execution of the strategy itself is a business issue and should stay as a problem in the business space. So I never like to see L&D kind of allowing themselves to become owners of those problems. any more than a therapist would allow themselves to become the owner of a problem that someone, like a phobia that someone walked in the door with. It just doesn't make any sense. Or the doctor taking over your broken leg. That's just, it doesn't happen. And there's no point, because if the doctor took on your broken leg, they can't heal it because it's your leg. So it's the same issue. The problem has to stay with the problem holder, and that must be apparent through that performance consultancy process. And you can make sure that happens. And there's some stuff in my book about that as well, the Red Book. But it's a really good question. And part of that too is you will, when you then start doing the learning interventions, and whatever those may take, and if they take a training form about learning transfer, some of the levers that you would need to pull, those 12 levers, are involving the manager and their role in that process. And again, that's an ownership role.
Well, Paul, thank you for all of that. You've answered some great questions from everybody with some great answers. We're going to come off webcam now, but Paul is not going anywhere, because what we are doing is just moving into a really quick reflection piece. So there's another chat pod on the screen for you, kind of in the main area of the screen. From the conversation today, what is it that you're going to actually do? So we've had some great questions from you, some great answers from Paul. And let's just think about, well, what are we going to put into place? Is it that we're going to look up learning transfer in more detail? Is it that we're going to go and research performance consulting? Just tell us, what is it that you're thinking about now in terms of what you can go and do? And I think there's been a great conversation in the chat window as well about everything that's been going on. And I've pasted links into Paul's books, also to Paul on LinkedIn as well, so that if you want to go and get that diagram that Paul highlighted, you can go and message him. And Eva, who works with Paul, has also put her email address in the chat window. So if you want anything, you can also email Eva direct if you want to. And of course, Paul also does a load of blogs for us on the Training Journal site, so you can always go to trainingjournal.com and have a look at his blogs. There's always something interesting and useful to say. So what are some of the things that we'll do after this conversation? Davina says to locate the diagram that Paul mentioned. So if you just email Eva, you'll be able to do that, Davina. And Andrew says we'll reflect through a few blog posts, one tomorrow about lack of ignorance, I think. Ooh, interesting. Now, please do keep typing. I'm just going to move the chat window to the top right-hand corner, but if you want to share some more, please do. Natalie says exploring more about performance consultancy. Linda says I'll link in with Paul, and that's all sounding good. Paul, a big thank you to you. What's your really super quick summary?
I think it's where we started. It's about that alignment of wants and needs. That has to be, those have to be aligned when you're starting a learning intervention, because otherwise it's just go to hell in a handbasket, basically. You've got to get that right, and all of the different stakeholders lined up. So what they want is what's being delivered, and what's being delivered is what they need.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul, so much for being here today. And I will put into the chat window a link to Paul's website as well, People Alchemy. So thank you, Paul, on behalf of everybody here and at Training Journal. That was really awesome. As we said, all our webinars are recorded. They're all available online, and you'll be able to register for our next webinar as well. We have Laura Overton. You probably all know Laura Overton previously of Towards Maturity, and a speaker, author, facilitator, analyst, and we're talking culture with Laura. So really looking forward to that one. So please do come along in the future. If you want to go and share any of the conversation nuggets, anything that you've learned today or picked up, please go and do so on #TJ and you can go and follow Training Journal and Lightbulb Joe and People Alchemy and find all of the great conversations on there. So thank you everybody for coming along. Really great time that we had today, and hopefully